An old Western myth speaks of the ghost rider, a cursed soul who rises once in a generation. Bound by fire and damnation, this rider roams the world to claim souls promised to the devil. Long ago, one such rider, Carter Slade, was sent to the desert town of San Venganza to retrieve a contract containing the souls of 1,000 sinners. Realizing the document's immense and dangerous power, Carter refused to deliver it. Instead, he fled, managing the impossible, outrunning the devil himself. Fast forward 150 years to 1986, where young Johnny Blaze works alongside his father Barton as a daredevil motorcycle stunt performer. Johnny's focus is often broken by his girlfriend Roxanne, who watches him from the crowd, much to Barton's frustration. Barton believes Johnny's distractions could get him killed. At the same time, Barton's health is visibly failing, yet he stubbornly continues smoking despite Johnny's attempts to stop him. One day, Roxanne visits Johnny with heartbreaking news. Her father is sending her away to live with her mother. Desperate and emotional, Johnny begs her to run away with him. She agrees, and they make plans to leave the next day. That night, Johnny discovers a discarded hospital letter revealing that Barton's cancer is spreading rapidly. The truth shakes him. Leaving his father now feels unforgivable. That's when Mephisto appears, offering Johnny a bargain, Barton's life in exchange for Johnny's soul. Johnny doubts the stranger's claims but inspects the contract anyway, accidentally slicing his finger on the paper. A single drop of blood seals the deal. Johnny collapses and awakens the next morning to find his father miraculously cured. Barton, now full of energy, excitedly plans an even more dangerous stunt show, urging Johnny to ride with him. But Johnny has already decided to leave with Roxanne. His rejection deeply wounds Barton, though he still allows Johnny to take his prized motorcycle. Moments later, Johnny hears chaos from the performance tent. Barton has died mid-show, just after a brief encounter with Mephisto. Overcome with guilt and terror over the bargain he made, Johnny flees, even considering ending his own life. Mephisto intervenes, revealing Johnny's fate isn't over yet. He ignites a supernatural flame within him and demands that Johnny abandon everything he loves. Terrified, Johnny rides past Roxanne, who waits for him, without a word, leaving her behind forever. 21 years later, in 2007, Johnny Blaze is a legendary stunt rider, famous for surviving crashes that should kill him. Though fearless in public, he's haunted by visions of Mephisto and the contract. He refuses interviews, keeps to himself, and studies strange religious texts, worrying his longtime friend Mac, especially since Johnny plans a massive, near-suicidal jump on the anniversary of his father's death. Johnny insists he's waiting for a sign. Meanwhile, Mephisto's rebellious son Blackheart arrives on Earth. He massacres a biker bar and summons 3 ancient fallen angels bound to the elements: Gressel Earth, Abigail Air, and Wallow Water. Together, they seek the lost San Venganza contract, believing its power will allow Blackheart to rule the world. Mephisto confronts his son, warning him that the time is not right, but Blackheart ignores him. Immune to Mephisto's influence on Earth, Blackheart mocks his father, bitterly resentful that such power was given to a human. As the day of Johnny's stunt approaches, reporters swarm the event, all of them ignored, until Johnny recognizes Roxanne, now a journalist, among them. Instead of answering her questions, Johnny turns the interview around, quietly desperate to learn what became of the woman he once left behind. The interview quickly falls apart, going nowhere, and Roxanne decides to leave. Her cameraman wants to stay, but she never enjoyed watching Johnny risk his life mid-jump anyway. For Johnny, though, seeing Roxanne again feels like the sign he's been waiting for. Instead of his usual stunt, he chooses to attempt his father's old, insane idea, leaping over a line of helicopters rather than cars. With his mind fixed on Roxanne instead of fear, Johnny pulls it off flawlessly. The crowd erupts, but Johnny doesn't stick around. He rides straight out of the stadium and races after Roxanne's van. She refuses to stop or even acknowledge him, so Johnny speeds ahead and blocks the road. Furious, Roxanne confronts him, but Johnny calmly points out that if she truly wanted nothing to do with him, she wouldn't have kissed him earlier. Though still angry, Roxanne can't deny it, and eventually agrees to have dinner with him later that night. Night falls and Roxanne waits at the restaurant, growing anxious as Johnny never shows up. Back at his apartment, Johnny notices something's wrong. His hands burn red-hot, and a strange voice calls out to him. Stepping outside, he's confronted by Mephisto, who demands Johnny stop Blackheart, reminding him it's part of their deal. Johnny refuses and jumps on his bike, determined to make it to his date. That's when the contract asserts itself. The motorcycle erupts into flames and rockets off at impossible speed, scorching everything in its path. At the same time, Blackheart and the Fallen arrive at an old train station built over a former cemetery, rumored to be the resting place of the San Venganza contract. The caretaker tells them the graves were relocated to a churchyard and orders them to leave. Blackheart responds by killing him without hesitation. Johnny's flaming bike carries him straight to the station warehouse, where he finally loses control. The curse fully takes hold, transforming him into the blazing skeletal entity known as the Ghost Rider. Blackheart appears unimpressed and sends Wallow, the waterbound Fallen, to deal with him before leaving. Big mistake. Johnny breaks free with ease, leaps onto Wallow, and annihilates him instantly using his supernatural chain engulfed in hellfire. With his power awakened, Johnny reshapes his bike into an even deadlier form and rides off. Along the way, he stops a robbery in progress. After the victim escapes, Johnny captures the thief and unleashes the penance stare, forcing the man to experience every ounce of pain he's ever inflicted on others. The weight of his sins destroys him completely. As dawn approaches, Johnny races to the local graveyard just in time to revert back to human form. He collapses at his father's grave, unaware that Carter Slade lies buried nearby, and is found by the station caretaker, who survives and takes him to his shack. When Johnny wakes hours later, the caretaker makes it clear everything he experienced was real, and it will happen again. Ghost Rider is now part of who he is. Though hesitant, Johnny accepts the caretaker's help. As the caretaker tends to Johnny's injuries, he explains the history of San Venganza, a town damned when its citizens slaughtered each other over greed, trapping their souls forever. Meanwhile, Roxanne reports on the train station massacre, interviewing the teenage girl Johnny saved. The girl describes a flaming skeleton, but Roxanne struggles to believe her. After the broadcast, Johnny approaches Roxanne to apologize. She rejects him, reminding him this is the second time he's broken her heart, and admits maybe her father was right about him being nothing more than a phase. Elsewhere, police recover a motorcycle license plate from the wreckage. Back home, Johnny studies his religious books and begins training himself to control the curse. His practice is interrupted when Roxanne visits, preparing to leave town. She apologizes for what she said, and emotions boil over into a kiss, but Johnny pulls away, terrified of endangering her. Enraged by his mixed signals, Roxanne demands the truth. When Johnny hints at something impossible and urges her to leave before sunset, she storms out, convinced he's just pushing her away again. The moment she's gone, police arrive and arrest Johnny. The license plate matches his bike. At the station, detectives attempt psychological pressure and threaten his career, but Johnny refuses to break. With no confession, they lock him in a cell, waiting for him to crack. Johnny is thrown into a crowded cell filled with inmates eager to rough up a famous stunt rider. As they move in, night finally arrives, and the curse awakens. Johnny transforms once more into the Ghost Rider, effortlessly flooring every attacker with a single strike, sparing only one young inmate whose soul remains untouched. Grabbing a jacket from another prisoner, Johnny melts through the bars and escapes, summoning his flaming bike. Police try to stop him, but he outruns them by riding straight across the surface of the water. Elsewhere, Blackheart confronts a priest believed to be guarding the secret location of the San Venganza contract. When the priest refuses to cooperate, Blackheart kills him. Sensing Ghost Rider's approach, Blackheart sends Abigail, the demon of air, to intercept him. A high-speed chase erupts through the city, with police in pursuit as well. When Abigail scales a towering skyscraper, Johnny follows, driving straight up the side of the building. Roxanne witnesses the impossible sight from her hotel room, finally realizing Johnny may have been telling the truth all along. At the rooftop, Johnny hurls a police helicopter aside with his chain before turning to Abigail. His usual attack fails, air cannot be grabbed. Thinking fast, Johnny spins his chain into a fiery vortex, trapping Abigail inside and destroying him. Johnny lands in the middle of a city street and briefly locks eyes with Roxanne in the crowd, but police interference forces him to leave. Their bullets do nothing, and Johnny clears his escape with a wall of fire. By sunrise, Johnny reaches the graveyard and seeks guidance from the caretaker. After hearing the full story of Carter, Slade, and the stolen contract, the caretaker warns Johnny that Blackheart will target the people he loves. Realizing the danger Roxanne is in, Johnny rushes back toward the city. Meanwhile, the police question Roxanne, hoping she can help them find Johnny. She pretends to know nothing. Later, she visits Johnny's apartment and finds Mac, desperately trying to understand his friend's strange behavior. Though hesitant to repeat such an unbelievable story, Roxanne agrees to search Johnny's religious texts with him for answers. As night falls, Blackheart and Wallow attack the caretaker, demanding the contract's location. When he refuses, Blackheart decides to strike at Johnny directly. He appears at the apartment, murders Mac, and turns his attention to Roxanne, planning to use her as leverage. Johnny arrives just in time and confronts Blackheart. He attempts the penance stare, but it fails. Blackheart has no soul. Taking advantage, Blackheart forces Johnny back into human form and abducts Roxanne, demanding the San Venganza contract in exchange for her life. Johnny returns to the graveyard and begs the caretaker for the contract. Revealing it was hidden inside a shovel all along, the caretaker entrusts it to Johnny, believing his deal was forged from love, not greed. He then reveals the truth: the grave of Carter Slade is fake. The caretaker is Carter Slade, the original Ghost Rider, and still holds his power. Summoning his hellish horse, Carter rides alongside Johnny to guide him to San Venganza. Knowing this is his final transformation, Carter hands Johnny a shotgun before departing. Johnny first encounters Wallow, who attempts to drown him in a swamp, but hellfire consumes water itself, and Johnny evaporates the demon instantly. He then confronts Blackheart, forcing him to drop Roxanne before pretending to surrender the contract. It's a trap, but dawn approaches. Johnny loses his powers just as Blackheart claims the contract and absorbs the souls within, transforming into the monstrous Legion. Even powerless, Johnny refuses to give up. He fires the shotgun, but it barely slows Legion, who grabs Johnny by the throat. Roxanne saves him by blasting Legion's head apart, buying Johnny precious seconds. While Legion regenerates, Johnny shadows the shotgun, infusing it with hellfire. Because sunlight, not time, is the true limitation, Johnny fires again, obliterating Legion once more. As Legion begins reforming from thousands of tortured souls, Johnny realizes the truth. Stepping back into the shadows, he transforms again. Now Legion contains souls and can be judged. Johnny unleashes the penance stare, burning every corrupted soul within Legion until nothing remains. With the threat ended, Roxanne approaches Johnny and gently touches his flaming face, proving she isn't afraid. She kisses him, accepting what he is. Mephisto soon appears, praising Johnny and demanding the Ghost Rider power be returned. Johnny refuses, choosing to keep it so it can never be abused again. This decision costs him a normal life. Understanding this has always been Johnny's destiny, Roxanne says goodbye. They share one final kiss before Johnny rides off into the horizon, embracing his fate as the last and only Ghost Rider. Analysis: before superheroes became jokes, teams, and merchandise, there was a character who didn't want to be a hero at all. A man who sold his soul, not for power, but out of fear. And what he became afterward was something even hell struggled to control. In 2007, Ghost Rider arrived as one of the darkest and strangest superhero films of its time. No colorful suit, no witty humor. No clear line between hero and monster. Just fire, chains, curses, and a man slowly losing control of himself. Even today, people still argue about this movie. Some call it flawed, some call it misunderstood, and others believe it was simply ahead of its time. What makes Ghost Rider different is simple, but unsettling. This hero doesn't gain power through science or destiny. He gets it through a deal with the devil. And every time that power is used, it reminds him that his soul is no longer his own. This isn't a story about becoming stronger. It's about living with a mistake you can never undo. In this video, we're diving deep into Ghost Rider, its story, its symbolism, its hidden meanings, and why this movie still burns in pop culture memory. This is not just a superhero film, it's a supernatural tragedy. A cautionary tale, and a question every viewer must face. What would you trade if the cost was your soul? So, what exactly is Ghost Rider, and why did it feel so different from the superhero films of its time? Released in 2007, Ghost Rider arrived during a strange era for comic book movies. This was before shared universes, before carefully planned sagas, and before superheroes were expected to be safe. Back then, studios were still experimenting, trying to figure out how dark, weird, or dangerous a comic adaptation could be. And Ghost Rider pushed right into that uncertainty. On the surface, it looks like a superhero movie, but in reality, it's something else entirely. Ghost Rider blends superhero action, dark fantasy, and supernatural horror. Its tone is heavier, more gothic, inspired by religious imagery, hellfire mythology, and urban legends. This isn't a bright world of hope. It's a world of shadows, consequences, and damnation. The film is set in modern-day America, moving between carnivals, highways, deserts, and dark city streets. These locations aren't random. They reflect a life constantly on the move, a man running from his past, never able to settle in one place for long. At its core, Ghost Rider follows a daredevil motorcyclist who makes a single, desperate choice, one that binds him to supernatural forces far beyond his understanding. By day, he's human. By night, he becomes something else. Not a hero by choice, but a weapon created by a deal he can never take back. And this is where Ghost Rider truly begins, not with a transformation, but with a curse. Because once that fire ignites, there is no turning back. To understand Ghost Rider, you have to forget what you expect from a superhero movie. Because this is not one genre, it's three colliding at once. At its core, Ghost Rider is a supernatural revenge story. It wears the costume of a superhero film, but its soul belongs to dark fantasy and horror. Instead of science or technology, this world is ruled by curses, demons, and ancient contracts. Power doesn't come from destiny. It comes from damnation. The heart of Ghost Rider beats around one terrifying idea: every deal has a price. Johnny Blaze doesn't choose heroism, he inherits punishment. The film explores damnation versus redemption. Can a cursed soul still choose good? Loss of control, power that activates against your will, consequences of desperation. How fear leads to irreversible choices. This isn't about saving the world. It's about surviving yourself. Emotionally, the movie is heavy, sometimes tragic, sometimes operatic. There's loneliness in every frame. Even when Johnny is surrounded by crowds, he's isolated, trapped between being human and being a weapon. The fire doesn't just burn enemies, it burns identity. Ghost Rider isn't made for viewers looking for light entertainment. It's for those drawn to darker comic book stories, gothic imagery, morally broken heroes. If you enjoy characters who walk the line between justice and damnation, this film speaks your language. Because in Ghost Rider, the greatest battle isn't against demons, it's against the curse that never lets you sleep. Every curse begins with a choice, and Johnny Blaze made his when he was still just a boy. Johnny Blaze grows up in the shadow of danger, motorcycles, fire, death-defying stunts. His father lives on the edge, performing impossible jumps, cheating death night after night. But when Johnny learns his father is dying of cancer, fear takes control. Desperate, young, helpless, that's when a stranger appears, polite, calm, too calm. Johnny signs a contract without reading the fine print. His father lives. The cancer vanishes, but the devil never gives, he only collects later. That same night, Johnny's father dies anyway, not from illness but from fate, and Johnny Blaze loses more than a parent. He loses his soul. Time passes. Johnny grows into a world-famous stunt rider, performing jumps no one else would dare attempt. The crowds cheer. The the cameras flash, but this isn't courage, it's punishment. Johnny believes the curse will kill anyone he gets close to, so he lives alone, moving constantly, never staying long enough to build a life. And then, the nights begin to change. When darkness falls, Johnny's body betrays him. His flesh burns away, his skull ignites, hellfire replaces blood. Johnny Blaze becomes the Ghost Rider, not a hero, not a villain, a weapon. Bound by ancient magic to serve the devil's will, the Ghost Rider hunts sinners, dragged into a war Johnny never agreed to fight. Each transformation strips away his humanity, leaving him terrified of what he's becoming. As Johnny struggles to understand his curse, a greater danger emerges, a demon seeking freedom, power without chains. Evil that even hell cannot control. Johnny learns the truth. The Ghost Rider was never meant to be a servant forever. He was meant to be a jailer, and now the prison is breaking. Johnny is given a chance. Surrender the power, walk away, be free. But freedom comes at a cost. If he gives up the curse, innocent lives will burn. If he keeps it, he may lose what little humanity remains. For the first time since signing that contract, Johnny realizes something crucial. The devil owns his soul, but not his choices. Johnny embraces the fire, not as a curse, but as responsibility. He stops running, stops hiding, and rides straight into damnation, not to serve it, but to stand against it. Because if hell created a monster, it made one that could turn on its master. Johnny Blaze's story isn't about becoming a hero. It's about accepting the consequences of fear and choosing who you are after the damage is done. And this choice changes everything. The ending of Ghost Rider isn't about victory, it's about definition. About what happens when a man realizes that losing his soul does not mean losing his will. On the surface, the finale looks simple. Evil is confronted, power is unleashed, and the immediate threat is destroyed. But beneath the fire and spectacle, something far more important happens. Johnny Blaze is offered an escape. The curse can be lifted, the suffering can end, the devil's grip can loosen. All Johnny has to do is walk away. And for the first time since the night he signed that contract, the choice is truly his. Throughout the film, Johnny believes one thing: I sold my soul. I no longer belong to myself. The ending shatters that belief. Yes, his soul is owned. But ownership is not obedience. The Ghost Rider's power was designed to punish sinners, not serve evil. That distinction matters. When Johnny turns that power against its original master's intentions, he proves a dangerous truth. Hell can create weapons, but it cannot fully control conscience. Johnny refuses to abandon the Ghost Rider, not because he wants the power, but because the world still needs protection from forces worse than him. Symbolically, this choice represents responsibility over relief, acceptance over denial, purpose over escape. He stops seeing the curse as something done to him and starts treating it as something he must carry, like guilt, like trauma, like consequence. Fire has always been associated with hell in the film, but the ending reframes it. The hellfire doesn't burn randomly. It burns truth. It reveals sin. It exposes guilt. It forces confrontation. In this sense, Johnny doesn't become hell's executioner. He becomes its mirror. Evil is no longer commanded. It is judged. The ending is deliberately bittersweet. Johnny does not get a normal life. He does not get redemption through forgiveness. He does not undo his mistake. Instead, he gets something heavier, meaning. The film suggests that redemption is not about erasing the past. It's about choosing what the past will turn you into. Ghost Rider ends by saying this: you cannot undo every bad choice. You cannot escape every consequence, but you can decide whether your punishment becomes destruction or protection. Johnny Blaze rides away not as a hero, not as a villain, but as a warning to hell. And to himself. Most people watch Ghost Rider and see fire, chains, and spectacle. But if you slow the film down frame by frame, you start to realize something unsettling. Almost nothing in this movie is random. Every flame, every shadow, every transformation is telling you who Johnny Blaze really is. The most misunderstood symbol in Ghost Rider is fire. Visually, hellfire never behaves like normal flames. It doesn't spread naturally. It ignites selectively. This is intentional. Fire appears only when Johnny loses emotional control. Sin is present. Judgment is required. The flames are not chaos. They are revelation. When Ghost Rider burns someone, the fire doesn't kill them instantly. It forces them to feel. Fire here represents exposed guilt. That's why innocent characters are never harmed by it. Hellfire doesn't punish morality. It punishes truth being hidden. The penance stare is the film's most terrifying weapon and the least understood. Visually, the camera locks the victim into Johnny's empty eye sockets. There is no escape, no distraction, no external enemy. Symbolically, the victim isn't being attacked. They're being forced to look inward. The stare doesn't create pain. It amplifies what already exists, which explains a crucial detail many miss. The penance stare fails on characters who feel no remorse. meaning the true weakness isn't strength, it's shamelessness. Ghost Rider's chains aren't just weapons, they are contracts given form. Notice how. They bind enemies before hurting them, they wrap, restrict, and pull back, they never strike randomly visually. Chains symbolize ownership, obligation, consequence. Every time Johnny uses them, he's reenacting his own deal, binding others the same way he was bound. He doesn't fight with fists, he fights with agreements already signed. Mirrors appear repeatedly throughout the film. Johnny avoids them as a human, but the Ghost Rider never does. Why? Because mirrors represent acceptance. Johnny cannot face himself. The Rider has no choice. In several scenes, reflective surfaces distort Johnny's face before transformation, hinting that the monster isn't arriving, it's already there. Motorcycles traditionally symbolize freedom. In Ghost Rider, that symbol is corrupted. Johnny rides constantly, never stopping, never settling. Movement replaces peace. When the bike transforms, its wheels ignite, turning freedom into a weapon. Visually, this says something tragic. Johnny can move anywhere, but belongs nowhere. The road is infinite, yet there is no destination. Pay attention to lighting. Johnny is human during the day, but powerless. At night, he becomes powerful, but loses control. This reversal is deliberate. Day represents identity without agency. Night represents agency without identity. The film suggests true freedom lies in neither extreme, but in balance, Johnny is still searching for. The Ghost Rider's skull design subtly changes with emotional intensity. The blue tint in certain Hellfire scenes references older comic runs, the carnival setting mirrors Ghost Rider's comic origins in spectacle and illusion. Even the exaggerated tone is intentional. It reflects the operatic, myth-heavy style of the original comics. Ghost Rider doesn't hide its meaning in dialogue, it hides it in images. Because this is a story about a man who signed his soul away with words, and now lives in a world where only visuals tell the truth. Every film leaves fingerprints behind, scratches in the frame, choices made under pressure, ideas that almost made it and others that were quietly buried. Ghost Rider is no exception. And once you step behind the flames, the story of how this movie was made becomes just as fascinating as the story it tells. Nicolas Cage didn't accept the role of Ghost Rider, he pursued it. Long before the cameras rolled, Cage was already a devoted comic fan, so much so that he owned rare Ghost Rider issues and actively studied the character's mythology. His performance wasn't meant to be subtle or grounded. It was meant to feel uncontrolled. The exaggerated reactions, the sudden mood swings, the strange intensity, all of it was designed to reflect a man whose soul is no longer fully his own. Cage wasn't playing realism. He was playing inner chaos. Creating Ghost Rider's skull was one of the film's biggest technical challenges. The problem wasn't making it look cool. The problem was making it feel alive. A skull has no muscles, no skin, no expressions. Yet the filmmakers needed the Ghost Rider to convey rage, pain, judgment, even restraint. So the flames themselves became the emotion. They flicker violently when Johnny is angry. They burn steadily when he's focused. They dim when he hesitates. The fire isn't decoration, it's performance. Early versions of Ghost Rider were significantly darker, more horror, more religious symbolism, more psychological weight. Several scenes exploring damnation and hell's hierarchy were either shortened or removed entirely to secure a broader theatrical release. This explains the tonal contrast many viewers feel, the sense that something heavier is always just beneath the surface. Because it was, the film deliberately avoids realism. Dialogue is heightened. Villains feel theatrical, moments lean operatic. This wasn't accidental. The creative team leaned into the idea of Ghost Rider as a modern myth, not a grounded superhero. The film borrows its tone from folklore, cautionary tales, and religious allegory rather than contemporary action cinema. That's why it feels timeless and strange, like a legend being retold, not a story being documented. The Ghost Rider's design subtly shifts across the film, becoming more skeletal and severe as Johnny accepts his role. The sound design of the chains includes distorted whispers, suggesting echoes of past contracts. Several background shots include religious iconography placed deliberately out of focus, reinforcing subconscious symbolism. None of this is explained. It's felt Ghost Rider didn't redefine the genre, but it did something else. It proved that superhero films could be grotesque, symbolic, morally uncomfortable. It walked so darker comic adaptations could run. And even today, its influence is visible in films that dare to blend heroism with horror. Some movies are remembered for perfection, others are remembered for boldness. Ghost Rider belongs to the second kind, flawed, fearless, burning with ideas that refuse to stay quiet. And sometimes, that's exactly what makes a film unforgettable. To understand Ghost Rider, you have to look at the film standing beside it. Not to judge it unfairly, but to see exactly why it feels so different and why it never fully fit into the superhero mold, because Ghost Rider wasn't competing on the same battlefield. Most superhero films are built on aspiration. The hero gains power, learns control, becomes better than before. Ghost Rider rejects that arc entirely. Johnny Blaze does not evolve upward, he descends inward. While characters like Spider-Man or Superman represent responsibility through strength, Ghost Rider represents responsibility through punishment. Power here is not earned, it is imposed. That alone places the film outside the comfort zone of mainstream superhero storytelling. The closest cinematic relatives to Ghost Rider are films like Blade and Constantine. All three share supernatural mythology, religious imagery, protagonists cursed rather than chosen, but there's a key difference. Blade hunts monsters by choice. Constantine fights hell out of defiance. Johnny Blaze does neither. He is dragged into conflict unwillingly. Where those characters fight against damnation, Ghost Rider exists within it. That makes his story less heroic and more tragic. Modern Marvel films prioritize humor, emotional accessibility, narrative clarity. Ghost Rider prioritizes atmosphere, symbolism, discomfort. It doesn't pause to reassure the audience. It doesn't soften its mythology. This is why it feels rough compared to later Marvel entries, but also why it feels riskier. It doesn't ask you to like Johnny Blaze, it asks you to understand him. Where Ghost Rider clearly outperforms many genre rivals is iconography. The flaming skull, the hellfire bike, the chains. These are not generic superhero visuals. They are instantly recognizable, almost mythic. Few characters in superhero cinema can be identified by silhouette alone. Ghost Rider can, and that visual strength is why the character never disappeared from pop culture, even when the film itself was criticized. Narratively, Ghost Rider struggles where more grounded films succeed. Character relationships are underdeveloped, the villain lacks emotional depth, the tonal balance shifts too sharply at times compared to its genre rivals. The film sacrifices cohesion in favor of ambition. It reaches high, sometimes higher than it can support. The most important comparison isn't with other superhero films, it's with myths. Like cautionary legends, Ghost Rider values message over polish, symbol over structure, mood over logic. When viewed as a myth told through cinema rather than a standard blockbuster, many of its flaws begin to make sense. Ghost Rider didn't fail because it was weak. It struggled because it was out of place. Too dark for mass appeal, too symbolic for casual viewing, too strange to blend in, and sometimes that's exactly what makes a film worth revisiting. When Ghost Rider was released, the verdict was immediate, and it was divided. Not between good and bad, but between expectation and experience. Because Ghost Rider didn't just split opinions, it created two completely different conversations. Critics approached Ghost Rider with a checklist. They looked for tonal consistency, emotional depth, narrative balance, and what they found instead was chaos. Reviews frequently pointed to uneven pacing, exaggerated performances, a story that felt pulled between horror and superhero, spectacle to many critics. Ghost Rider felt unfocused, a film unsure of what it wanted to be. In a genre moving toward polish and clarity, this movie felt wild, and wild was not considered a compliment. Audiences, however, weren't grading structure. They were responding to vibe, to imagery, to attitude, to the rawness of something that didn't feel manufactured. Many viewers didn't see inconsistency, they saw intensity. They connected with the tragic hero, the heavy metal aesthetic, the idea of power as punishment for these viewers. Ghost Rider wasn't broken. It was different. Commercially, the film succeeded. It didn't collapse, it didn't disappear. It made its presence known, which complicated the narrative. Because financially, Ghost Rider proved there was an audience for darker comic films, even if critics weren't comfortable with them yet. Success without critical approval created tension, and tension creates legacy. Years later, something interesting happened. The conversation changed. As superhero films became more formulaic, Ghost Rider began to feel strangely refreshing. What once felt messy now felt bold. What once felt exaggerated now felt intentional. Viewers started asking a new question. Was this movie actually bad, or just early? Ghost Rider isn't underrated in the traditional sense. And it isn't overrated either. It's misunderstood. It was judged as a superhero movie when it was really trying to be a supernatural myth. Critics wanted precision. Audiences wanted feeling. And Ghost Rider chose feeling every single time. History has been kinder to Ghost Rider than opening weekend ever was, not because the film changed, but because the genre did. And once the noise faded, one truth remained. People never forgot it, and forgotten movies don't spark debates years later. So where does Ghost Rider finally land? Not as a masterpiece, not as a disaster, but as something far more interesting. This film dared to be uncomfortable. It gave us a superhero who isn't inspirational but cautionary, a character defined not by hope but by consequence. Its imagery is unforgettable, its symbolism is heavy. And its central idea, that power gained through fear will always demand payment, still burns long after the credits roll. Few superhero films are brave enough to say, you don't always win, you don't always heal. Sometimes you just carry the weight. Yes, the film stumbles, its tone wavers, its characters don't always get the depth they deserve, and at times ambition outruns execution, but these flaws don't come from carelessness, they come from reach. From trying to turn a myth into a blockbuster without sanding off its sharp edges. Ghost Rider is not for everyone. It's for viewers who appreciate flawed heroes, dark symbolism stories that linger instead of comfort. If you need polish, clarity, and reassurance, this film will frustrate you. But if you're drawn to stories about inner demons, irrevocable choices, and the price of becoming something you never wanted to be, this movie speaks your language. Ghost Rider doesn't ask to be loved, it asks to be understood. It's a film about a man who made the wrong choice for the right reason and decided to live with it. No reset button, no escape, just fire, judgment, and the road ahead. And maybe that's why Ghost Rider still matters. Because some stories aren't about saving the world. They're about learning how to ride forward after you've already lost your soul. When Ghost Rider burns someone, the fire doesn't kill them instantly. It forces them to feel. Fire here represents exposed guilt. That's why innocent characters are never harmed by it. Hellfire doesn't punish morality. It punishes truth being hidden. The penance stare is the film's most terrifying weapon and the least understood. Visually, the camera locks the victim into Johnny's empty eye sockets. There is no escape, no distraction, no external enemy. Symbolically, the victim isn't being attacked. They're being forced to look inward. The stare doesn't create pain. It amplifies what already exists, which explains a crucial detail many miss. The penance stare fails on characters who feel no remorse, meaning the true weakness isn't strength, it's shamelessness. Ghost Rider's chains aren't just weapons. They are contracts given form. Notice how. They bind enemies before hurting them. They wrap, restrict, and pull back. They never strike randomly visually. Chains symbolize ownership, obligation, consequence. Every time Johnny uses them, he's reenacting his own deal, binding others the same way he was bound. He doesn't fight with fists. He fights with agreements already signed. Mirrors appear repeatedly throughout the film. Johnny avoids them as a human, but the Ghost Rider never does. Why? Because mirrors represent acceptance. Johnny cannot face himself. The Rider has no choice. In several scenes, reflective surfaces distort Johnny's face before transformation, hinting that the monster isn't arriving, it's already there. Motorcycles traditionally symbolize freedom. In Ghost Rider, that symbol is corrupted. Johnny rides constantly, never stopping, never settling. Movement replaces peace. When the bike transforms, its wheels ignite, turning freedom into a weapon. Visually, this says something tragic. Johnny can move anywhere, but belongs nowhere. The road is infinite, yet there is no destination. Pay attention to lighting. Johnny is human during the day, but powerless. At night, he becomes powerful, but loses control. This reversal is deliberate. Day represents identity without agency. Night represents agency without identity. The film suggests true freedom lies in neither extreme, but in balance Johnny is still searching for. The Ghost Rider's skull design subtly changes with emotional intensity. The blue tint in certain Hellfire scenes references older comic runs. The carnival setting mirrors Ghost Rider's comic origins in spectacle and illusion. Even the exaggerated tone is intentional. It reflects the operatic, myth-heavy style of the original comics. Ghost Rider doesn't hide its meaning in dialogue. It hides it in images. Because this is a story about a man who signed his soul away with words and now lives in a world where only visuals tell the truth. Every film leaves fingerprints behind, scratches in the frame, choices made under pressure, ideas that almost made it and others that were quietly buried. Ghost Rider is no exception. And once you step behind the flames, the story of how this movie was made becomes just as fascinating as the story it tells. Nicolas Cage didn't accept the role of Ghost Rider. He pursued it. Long before the cameras rolled, Cage was already a devoted comic fan, so much so that he owned rare Ghost Rider issues and actively studied the character's mythology. His performance wasn't meant to be subtle or grounded. It was meant to feel uncontrolled. The exaggerated reactions, the sudden mood swings, the strange intensity, all of it was designed to reflect a man whose soul is no longer fully his own. Cage wasn't playing realism. He was playing inner chaos. Creating Ghost Rider's skull was one of the film's biggest technical challenges. The problem wasn't making it look cool. The problem was making it feel alive. A skull has no muscles, no skin, no expressions. Yet the filmmakers needed the Ghost Rider to convey rage, pain, judgment, even restraint. so the flames themselves became the emotion. They flicker violently when Johnny is angry. They burn steadily when he's focused. They dim when he hesitates. The fire isn't decoration, it's performance. Early versions of Ghost Rider were significantly darker, more horror, more religious symbolism, more psychological weight. Several scenes exploring damnation and hell's hierarchy were either shortened or removed entirely to secure a broader theatrical release. This explains the tonal contrast many viewers feel, the sense that something heavier is always just beneath the surface. Because the film deliberately avoids realism. Dialogue is heightened, villains feel theatrical, moments lean operatic. This wasn't accidental. The creative team leaned into the idea of Ghost Rider as a modern myth, not a grounded superhero. The film borrows its tone from folklore, cautionary tales, and religious allegory rather than contemporary action cinema. That's why it feels timeless and strange, like a legend being retold, not a story being documented. The Ghost Rider's design subtly shifts across the film, becoming more skeletal and severe as Johnny accepts his role. The sound design of the chains includes distorted whispers, suggesting echoes of past contracts. Several background shots include religious iconography placed deliberately out of focus, reinforcing subconscious symbolism. None of this is explained. It's felt Ghost Rider didn't redefine the genre, but it did something else. It proved that superhero films could be grotesque, symbolic, morally uncomfortable. It walked so darker comic adaptations could run. And even today, its influence is visible in films that dare to blend heroism with horror. Some movies are remembered for perfection, others are remembered for boldness. Ghost Rider belongs to the second kind, flawed, fearless, burning with ideas that refuse to stay quiet. And sometimes, that's exactly what makes a film unforgettable. To understand Ghost Rider, you have to look at the film standing beside it. Not to judge it unfairly, but to see exactly why it feels so different, and why it never fully fit into the superhero mold, because Ghost Rider wasn't competing on the same battlefield. Most superhero films are built on aspiration. The hero gains power, learns control, becomes better than before. Ghost Rider rejects that arc entirely. Johnny Blaze does not evolve upward, he descends inward. While characters like Spider-Man or Superman represent responsibility through strength, Ghost Rider represents responsibility through punishment. Power here is not earned, it is imposed. That alone places the film outside the comfort zone of mainstream superhero storytelling. The closest cinematic relatives to Ghost Rider are films like Blade and Constantine. All three share supernatural mythology, religious imagery, protagonists cursed rather than chosen, but there's a key difference. Blade hunts monsters by choice. Constantine fights hell out of defiance. Johnny Blaze does neither. He is dragged into conflict unwillingly. Where those characters fight against damnation, Ghost Rider exists within it. That makes his story less heroic and more tragic. Modern Marvel films prioritize humor, emotional accessibility, narrative clarity. Ghost Rider prioritizes atmosphere, symbolism, discomfort. It doesn't pause to reassure the audience. It doesn't soften its mythology. This is why it feels rough compared to later Marvel entries, but also why it feels riskier. It doesn't ask you to like Johnny Blaze, it asks you to understand him. Where Ghost Rider clearly outperforms many genre rivals is iconography. The flaming skull, the hellfire bike, the chains. These are not generic superhero visuals. They are instantly recognizable, almost mythic. Few characters in superhero cinema can be identified by silhouette alone. Ghost Rider can, and that visual strength is why the character never disappeared from pop culture, even when the film itself was criticized. Narratively, Ghost Rider struggles where more grounded films succeed. Character relationships are underdeveloped, the villain lacks emotional depth, the tonal balance shifts too sharply at times compared to its genre rivals. The film sacrifices cohesion in favor of ambition. It reaches high, sometimes higher than it can support. The most important comparison isn't with other superhero films, it's with myths. Like cautionary legends, Ghost Rider values message over polish, symbol over structure, mood over logic. When viewed as a myth told through cinema rather than a standard blockbuster, many of its flaws begin to make sense. Ghost Rider didn't fail because it was weak. It struggled because it was out of place. Too dark for mass appeal, too symbolic for casual viewing, too strange to blend in, and sometimes that's exactly what makes a film worth revisiting. When Ghost Rider was released, the verdict was immediate, and it was divided. Not between good and bad, but between expectation and experience. Because Ghost Rider didn't just split opinions, it created two completely different conversations. Critics approached Ghost Rider with a checklist. They looked for tonal consistency, emotional depth, narrative balance, and what they found instead was chaos. reviews frequently pointed to. Uneven pacing, exaggerated performances, a story that felt pulled between horror and superhero, spectacle to many critics. Ghost Rider felt unfocused, a film unsure of what it wanted to be. In a genre moving toward polish and clarity, this movie felt wild, and wild was not considered a compliment. Audiences, however, weren't grading structure. They were responding to vibe, to imagery, to attitude, to the rawness of something that didn't feel manufactured. Many viewers didn't see inconsistency, they saw intensity. They connected with the tragic hero, the heavy metal aesthetic, the idea of power as punishment for these viewers. Ghost Rider wasn't broken. It was different. Commercially, the film succeeded. It didn't collapse, it didn't disappear. It made its presence known, which complicated the narrative. Because financially, Ghost Rider proved there was an audience for darker comic films, even if critics weren't comfortable with them yet. Success without critical approval created tension, and tension creates legacy. Years later, something interesting happened. The conversation changed. As superhero films became more formulaic, Ghost Rider began to feel strangely refreshing. What once felt messy now felt bold. What once felt exaggerated now felt intentional. Viewers started asking a new question. Was this movie actually bad, or just early? Ghost Rider isn't underrated in the traditional sense. And it isn't overrated either. It's misunderstood. It was judged as a superhero movie when it was really trying to be a supernatural myth. Critics wanted precision. Audiences wanted feeling. And Ghost Rider chose feeling every single time. History has been kinder to Ghost Rider than opening weekend ever was, not because the film changed, but because the genre did. And once the noise faded, one truth remained. People never forgot it, and forgotten movies don't spark debates years later. So where does Ghost Rider finally land? Not as a masterpiece, not as a disaster, but as something far more interesting. This film dared to be uncomfortable. It gave us a superhero who isn't inspirational but cautionary, a character defined not by hope but by consequence. Its imagery is unforgettable, its symbolism is heavy, and its central idea that power gained through fear will always demand payment still burns long after the credits roll. Few superhero films are brave enough to say, you don't always win, you don't always heal. Sometimes you just carry the weight. Yes, the film stumbles, its tone wavers, its characters don't always get the depth they deserve, and at times ambition outruns execution, but these flaws don't come from carelessness, they come from reach. From trying to turn a myth into a blockbuster without sanding off its sharp edges. Ghost Rider is not for everyone. It's for viewers who appreciate flawed heroes, dark symbolism, stories that linger instead of comfort. If you need polish, clarity, and reassurance, this film will frustrate you. But if you're drawn to stories about inner demons, irrevocable choices, and the price of becoming something you never wanted to be, this movie speaks your language. Ghost Rider doesn't ask to be loved, it asks to be understood. It's a film about a man who made the wrong choice for the right reason and decided to live with it. No reset button, no escape, just fire, judgment, and the road ahead. And maybe that's why Ghost Rider still matters. Because some stories aren't about saving the world. They're about learning how to ride forward after you've already lost your soul. REVIEWS. I've sat through more B-movies than I can count, and bad films usually don't scare me off. In fact, I can often enjoy them, as long as they're at least entertaining. For me, boredom is the ultimate crime in cinema. Sadly, this comic book spectacle commits that sin repeatedly. What we get here is an overstuffed, sluggish, and strangely lifeless film that struggles to offer even a single compelling reason to recommend it. I'm growing increasingly weary of the modern wave of comic adaptations. Sure, early entries like Spider-Man and even Daredevil had some genuine charm, and I'll always respect the influence of creators like Frank Miller, but even the so-called good adaptations now feel padded and hollow. Ghost Rider sinks even lower, rivaling Fantastic Four for sheer cinematic misery. At this point, the only real curiosity lies in watching Nicolas Cage continue his dramatic career nosedive from once promising leading man to unintentional parody. The story itself is thin and uninspired. Cage plays a man cursed to serve as the devil's errand runner, collecting damned souls and dispatching evil on command. Naturally, he eventually clashes with the devil's rebellious son, played by Wes Bentley, whose presence is mostly defined by awkward CGI glitches erupting across his face. Peter Fonda, sporting truly unfortunate hair, makes little impact as the devil, especially when compared to far superior takes on the role in other films. But the most painful aspect is Cage himself. What once felt like amusing eccentricity now comes across as a tired routine. The exaggerated expressions, rubbery faces, and bizarre mannerisms are no longer endearing, they're exhausting. It becomes painfully obvious that this is his entire performance toolkit. Add to that the excessive use of stunt doubles and outdated green screen motorcycle shots, where the bike barely moves while the background slides past, and the illusion collapses entirely. That said, not everything is a total loss. Some of the visual effects are genuinely impressive. The flaming skull and peeling flesh effects look slick and well rendered, even if they occasionally drift into cartoon territory. Eva Mendes feels more like a glossy visual accessory than a fully written character, continuing the trend of casting beauty over depth. The villains are laughably generic, recalling the same hollow spectacle found in Van Helsing. The film drags on for nearly 2 hours only to land on the familiar, beat the bad guy conclusion. From a story perspective, the setup is straightforward. Johnny Blaze, a daredevil motorcycle stuntman, makes a desperate bargain with the devil to save his dying father. Although the illness is cured, the deal twists cruelly. His father dies anyway, and Johnny is left bound to a supernatural contract he can't escape. He walks away from his old life, including his love interest Roxanne, fully aware that the devil will eventually come to collect. I watched the extended cut, which in hindsight was probably a mistake. Several scenes linger far longer than necessary, bloating an already sluggish narrative. There's too much buildup before the story truly begins, and the finale overstays its welcome as well. Still, despite all its flaws, I can't deny that parts of the film are mildly fun. Once you adjust to the absurdity, the Flaming Skull antihero becomes oddly entertaining. Cage remains a fascinating contradiction. He's proven capable of remarkable performances, yet he frequently chooses roles like this, over-the-top, chaotic, and uneven. While his acting here doesn't succeed in any traditional sense, it does provide a certain unintentional amusement. The supporting cast helps somewhat. Fonda has fun with the devil persona, Sam Elliott brings some gravitas in a brief but memorable role, and Mendes is serviceable as the romantic lead. In the end, Ghost Rider never quite ignites the way it promises. The climax delivers a standard comic book showdown, but by then the film has already worn out its welcome. It's flashy, noisy, and visually polished, but also shallow, repetitive, and ultimately forgettable. This is no masterpiece, but for fans of loud, effects-driven comic films, it might just be passable as a one-time rental. When Mephistopheles enters Johnny Blaze's life, everything changes. He offers Johnny a cruel bargain: destroy his rebellious son, Blackheart, and earn freedom from his cursed contract. That deal transforms Johnny into the Ghost Rider, a blazing, supernatural vigilante tearing across the highways on a hellfire-fueled motorcycle. Visually, the flaming skull and infernal bike still look striking, and Nicolas Cage delivers a committed performance, playing the Rider more like a dark guardian than a traditional superhero, punishing evil while protecting the innocent. That said, the story itself never rises above simplicity. The narrative feels thin, and most of the supporting characters barely leave a mark. Eva Mendes is underused and mostly present for visual appeal rather than substance. Peter Fonda carries a cool presence but little depth. Sam Elliott feels like a walking legend, all gravitas, mustache, and mystery, but his role fades away just as strangely as it arrives. Wes Bentley's Blackheart, meanwhile, never becomes more than a predictable villain archetype, offering little personality beyond the devil's son stereotype. As a Marvel adaptation, the film feels like a missed opportunity. With stronger creative direction, this could have been something far more impactful, especially if it had been fully developed under Marvel Studios, rather than loosely tied to the brand in the early era of comic book cinema. Cage does his best with the material, even injecting some playful energy into Johnny Blaze, though the awkward styling choices and uneven tone don't help. Ultimately, it becomes a serviceable distraction, not terrible, not great, just passable entertainment. The story itself is classic Faustian tragedy. As a young man, Johnny sells his soul to save his dying father, only to discover the devil's promise comes with a cruel twist. Though his father's illness vanishes, fate takes him anyway, leaving Johnny broken, betrayed, and alone. Years later, Johnny becomes a famous stunt rider, seemingly untouchable by death, until fate catches up with him again. When Blackheart rises with plans to unleash hell on Earth, Mephistopheles calls in his debt, forcing Johnny to become the Ghost Rider, a supernatural enforcer trapped between damnation and redemption. Despite its flaws, the film remains watchable. The special effects and CGI are still visually impressive, especially for a 2007 production, and they give the movie its strongest moments. The cast is stacked with recognizable faces, and while not everyone is given meaningful material, their presence adds polish to the overall presentation. Rewatching Ghost Rider years later, it feels rushed and emotionally shallow. The world building is thin, the mythology is barely explored, and the characters never fully develop. Still, it manages to be mildly entertaining. It's not groundbreaking cinema, nor is it particularly memorable, but it functions as a decent time passer. The action sequences deliver spectacle, even if they lack emotional weight, and the visual design carries more impact than the story itself. In the end, Ghost Rider plays more like a visually stylized concept than a fully realized film. It's a movie built on strong imagery, familiar mythology, and special effects, but held back by weak storytelling and underdeveloped characters. It doesn't inspire, and it doesn't linger in memory, but for a casual watch, it delivers just enough entertainment to justify its runtime. At first glance, the film feels stylish and promising, but that novelty wears off far too quickly. One of its biggest missed opportunities is the failure to fully develop Blaze as a person before turning him into a visual spectacle. Because that groundwork is never laid, the action sequences feel oddly hollow. I never felt emotionally invested, and as a result, the explosions and effects landed cold rather than exciting. Nicolas Cage struggles to find solid footing with the character. His performance often feels stiff and overly obvious, and even before Blaze transforms into the writer, there's little sense of personality or inner conflict. Bringing life to a character who literally becomes a flaming effect was never going to be easy, but the lack of conviction only makes it harder to connect. Peter Fonda is an inspired casting choice, yet his presence doesn't leave much impact. Wes Bentley as the Devil's Son lacks menace and authority, which weakens both the stakes and the overall tension. Eva Mendes is arguably the most enjoyable element of the film. She brings charm and energy, but the script gives her very little to work with. Her role leans heavily on surface-level appeal rather than depth, and while she is undeniably charismatic, her character never truly evolves. By the end, she feels more like an accessory to the plot than a meaningful emotional anchor. Overall, the film feels flat and underwhelming. It ticks the basic boxes and delivers polished visual effects, but where is the soul? Where are the emotions, love, rage, obsession, revenge, that should drive a story like this? Without those elements, the film rarely sparks to life and never fully ignites. The story itself follows a familiar supernatural bargain. Mephistopheles the devil sends his cursed enforcer, the Phantom Rider, to reclaim a powerful contract tied to 1,000 corrupt souls. Each generation produces a rider bound to serve hell, but this particular one refuses, fleeing with the contract to prevent hell from invading Earth. Over a century later, the devil strikes again, approaching young stunt motorcyclist Johnny Blaze with an offer too tempting to refuse: save his dying father in exchange for his soul. As an adult, Blaze lives with the consequences of that pact. Forced to serve Mephistopheles, he is tasked with stopping Blackheart, the devil's rebellious son, who seeks to overthrow his father and create a far worse version of hell on Earth. Blaze becomes trapped between two worlds, his curse doubling as his greatest weapon. The film repeatedly asks whether any of the sacrifices he made were worth the price he ultimately paid. Ghost Rider 2007 brings together two comic book enthusiasts, Nicolas Cage and director Mark Steven Johnson. Johnson, known for his earlier Marvel work, revisits the genre with a story rooted in Faustian mythology. Cage's passion for the character is clear, and he appears comfortable in the role, but even his commitment can't bridge the gaps in the script. Plot holes are frequent, villains are dispatched with minimal impact, and the emotional weight never matches the visual ambition. The film undeniably boasts impressive special effects, a striking visual design, and a cast filled with recognizable faces, including a memorable appearance by Sam Elliott. However, strong aesthetics alone can't compensate for weak character development and shallow storytelling. Despite professional direction and moments of spectacle, the film never fully capitalizes on its intriguing premise. Mark Steven Johnson proves himself a capable craftsman, but here his work feels uneven. His recurring themes, isolated protagonists, broken families, and internal conflict, are present yet underdeveloped. In the end, Ghost Rider looks the part of a dark superhero epic, but lacks the emotional fire needed to truly burn its mark into memory. The story of Ghost Rider taps into a familiar Hollywood pattern where fathers loom large, absent, or tragic. Much like Jack Frost 1998, where a father returns in an unusual form, or Simon Birch 1998, where the truth about parentage is withheld, and even Daredevil 2003, where loss shapes the hero's path, Johnny Blaze's journey is driven by his relationship with his father. This alone makes the film particularly appealing to fans of Nicolas Cage, who thrives in emotionally heightened roles. One thing Ghost Rider undeniably gets right is its visual presentation. You know that sinking feeling when a superhero film completely fumbles how the hero's powers look on screen? Thankfully, that's not the case here. The CGI is surprisingly effective, bringing the flaming skull and Hellfire motorcycle to life in a way that genuinely feels ripped from the pages of a Marvel comic. This applies not only to the modern incarnation of Ghost Rider, but also to the original Old West version, created by writer Dick Ayers, which adds a nice mythic layer to the film. The plot itself is fairly standard and doesn't pretend otherwise. Instead of threatening the entire planet, the danger is localized to the cursed town of San Venganza, whose trapped souls are coveted by Blackheart, the rebellious son of Mephistopheles. Along the way, the film introduces entertaining comic book concepts like the penance stare and delivers plenty of cheesy but fun one-liners. One standout exchange comes from Sam Elliott's caretaker, who dryly tells Johnny Blaze, "Congratulations, your chances just went from none to slim." Nicolas Cage may have just slipped into the superhero genre before age fully caught up with him, but he still commits wholeheartedly. It's a fun bit of trivia that Cage even took his stage name from Marvel's Luke Cage, though it's probably best not to expect a film about that character anytime soon. As the Devil's reluctant bounty hunter, Johnny ultimately defeats Blackheart using a conveniently effective loophole involving innocent blood, though it does feel a little too easy for a final showdown. If anyone truly steals the movie, it's Sam Elliott as Carter Slade, the original Ghost Rider. His presence adds gravitas, even if the film never fully explains how his existence overlaps with Johnny's. Fortunately, that ambiguity doesn't hurt the experience much. This is very much a movie to watch with low expectations, an escapist mindset, and a couple of hours to spare. Eva Mendes fills the role of Johnny's love interest, and her presence gives the film a romantic edge that oddly pairs well with the film's dusty, supernatural vibe. At times, it's hard not to mentally cue up a Johnny Cash song as the story unfolds. After reading several brutal reviews beforehand, I expected the movie to be far worse than it was. Instead, I found a comic book adaptation that actually embraces being fun, something certain modern superhero films seem afraid to do. The premise is knowingly absurd. Johnny Blaze sells his soul to save his dying father, only for that father to die anyway in a tragic stunt accident. Bound to Mephistopheles, Johnny waits for the day he must become Ghost Rider, tasked with hunting damned souls. His only shot at freedom is stopping Blackheart's attempted coup against hell itself. The filmmakers seem fully aware of how ridiculous this all sounds, and wisely focus on spectacle, humor, and Cage's eccentric energy. That said, the movie does stumble in places. The mythology isn't clearly explained until well past the halfway mark, which can be confusing. Tonally, the film shifts from comic book fun to near-horror territory, becoming darker than necessary. While modern comics may lean heavily into grim storytelling, it's a little disappointing that lighter superhero fun seems less welcome these days. The ending also overstays its welcome. With sharper editing, the film could have easily been trimmed by 20 to 30 minutes. At nearly 2 hours, it drags more than it should, especially given how visually driven the experience is. Another weak spot is Peter Fonda's performance as Mephistopheles. The role had real potential, but his stiff delivery drains much of the menace from the devil himself. In the end, Ghost Rider won't change your life or redefine the genre, but it doesn't deserve the level of disdain it received either. It's a loud, fiery, occasionally messy ride that delivers exactly what it promises. Supernatural action, comic book flair, and Nicolas Cage doing what only Nicolas Cage can do. After all these years, you might expect at least a hint of his father's acting brilliance to show up, but sadly, that doesn't really happen. In the end, this film lands exactly where many people predicted, surprisingly decent in a few places, disappointingly weak in others, and ultimately settling into the category of just okay. Every now and then, maybe once or twice a year, you come across a movie that you already know won't redefine cinema, spark deep philosophical debates, or impress you with poetic dialogue. And yet, skipping it in theaters feels like a mistake, simply because it promises loud, flashy fun. Ghost Rider fits perfectly into that slot. Inspired by darker comic book mythology and loaded with explosive stunt work, it delivers spectacle even if it lacks lasting impact. It's far from a classic, and it probably won't stick in your memory for long, but it does provide steady thrills from start to finish. At its core, the film leans into grim subject matter, packs with the devil, cursed souls, and eternal damnation, but treats it all with a surprisingly playful, almost carefree attitude. The story follows Johnny Blaze, a young stunt motorcyclist who sells his soul to the demon Mephistopheles in a desperate attempt to save his dying father from cancer. Years later, Blaze has become a famous daredevil who appears practically indestructible, only for the devil to return and demand payment. Johnny is transformed into the Ghost Rider, a supernatural enforcer tasked with stopping Blackheart, a fallen angel intent on unleashing chaos on Earth. There are plenty of side threads woven in. Johnny reconnecting with his old flame, a strange graveyard caretaker who seems to know far more than he lets on, and various supernatural detours. Still, the film's real obsession is its main attraction, Nicolas Cage in flamboyant outfits, bursting into a flaming skull-headed vigilante. The clashes between Ghost Rider and Blackheart's elemental henchmen are energetic and visually engaging, and while the effects aren't groundbreaking, they're handled competently enough to sell the mayhem. Watching buildings shatter and demons explode is undeniably fun when you're sitting comfortably in a theater seat. Cage, to his credit, seems fully aware of how absurd the whole thing is. He doesn't play it straight. Instead, he leans into the madness with odd mannerisms, awkward humor, and dry one-liners that add an unexpected layer of comedy. Peter Fonda's appearance is another highlight. Seeing him back in a major production is enjoyable, especially given the irony of his role. Not long ago, he was running from devil worshippers in Race with the Devil. Here, he is the devil, and he clearly relishes every moment of it. Visually, the film does a solid job creating a dark, menacing atmosphere. The locations feel appropriately sinister. Eva Mendes looks as stunning as ever. Ghost Rider's motorcycle and weaponry are undeniably cool, and the soundtrack even features a modernized take on Johnny Cash's Ghost Riders in the Sky, which feels like a perfect thematic fit. It's hard to be overly harsh on a movie like this. It knows exactly what it is: loud, ridiculous, brain-off entertainment. Did director Mark Steven Johnson fully understand what kind of film he was making? Probably better than anyone else. Still, it's amusing to imagine him trying to defend this movie as a serious claim to big-budget action credibility. Compared to it, Daredevil almost looks refined, but at the same time, Ghost Rider is oddly more entertaining. Where Daredevil felt generic, Ghost Rider embraces excess. Over-the-top effects, outrageous stunts, painfully cheesy dialogue, and what might be Nicolas Cage's most gloriously unhinged performance yet. By all logic, I shouldn't recommend it, and yet, somehow, it's worth at least one watch. It's like a disposable gadget you buy on impulse, works surprisingly well once in all the wrong ways, then probably never again. Unlike some notorious misfires from that era, it doesn't completely insult the audience, even with its many flaws. Part of me was genuinely annoyed, thinking, is this really what comic book action films have become? But another part of me, fully expecting disaster, had an absolute blast soaking up every trashy, camp-filled "what on earth did I just see" moment. And Nicolas Cage, well, summoned from the uneven career path he's wandered down since winning his Oscar, he plays Johnny Blaze as a man driven by the simplest motivations imaginable. He loves writing, still loves his teenage sweetheart, hates the devil's offspring, and wants out of his cursed deal. The Ghost Rider himself could have been something genuinely impressive, but instead becomes unintentionally hilarious, less awe-inspiring, and more laugh-inducing. Still, credit where it's due. The movie is rarely boring. Watching Ghost Rider obliterate enemies with his flaming chain, especially an undead villain made entirely of wind, is pure spectacle. Add in the eccentric appearances of Peter Fonda and Sam Elliott, both feeling like exaggerated versions of their former selves, and you get something strangely captivating. Eva Mendes also serves as a visual and emotional counterbalance to Cage's stiff, exaggerated performance. In the end, Ghost Rider isn't good in any traditional sense, but it is fun, and sometimes that's enough. There's no shortage of memorable dialogue to accompany the film's gleefully unhinged visuals. As the movie barrels forward, style and logic start blending into one chaotic soup, like how the police instantly figure out Johnny Blaze is behind the early crimes with practically zero evidence, or how Ghost Rider casually defies gravity by riding straight up a skyscraper. By the time the final act rolled around, my friends and I had completely surrendered to the madness. We found ourselves doing what we'd already been inching toward the whole time, turning into a real-life Mystery Science Theater 3000, tossing out sarcastic commentary and laughing uncontrollably, especially during Bentley's infamous transformation into Legion for We Are Many. Ironically, that's exactly what saves the movie from being a total write-off. The film practically invites that kind of playful dismantling, and while some might still call it a waste of film stock, they wouldn't be entirely wrong. Still, what a glorious waste. It sits comfortably among Hollywood's most shamelessly entertaining disasters, rubbing shoulders with cult curiosities like Howard the Duck and Zardoz. Just don't walk in expecting a faithful or respectable translation of its source material. Going in with a completely open mind is tough. Nicolas Cage's career has been wildly inconsistent. Comic book adaptations were still hit or miss at the time, and early to mid-2000s CGI was stuck in that awkward phase where ambition far outpaced refinement. Looking specifically at pre-shared universe Marvel films, the results vary widely. some aged gracefully, some collapsed under hindsight, and others were clearly troubled from the start. Against that backdrop, it's immediately obvious that everyone involved here was having a blast making this movie, and that counts for something. More importantly, the film's primary goal is simple entertainment. And honestly, isn't that what these genre rides are supposed to deliver? That said, the flaws are impossible to ignore. Let's address the biggest offender, the CGI. The more it's used, the worse it looks. This becomes painfully apparent during the sequence where Ghost Rider is first fully revealed, flaming skull and all, and it only grows more distracting from there. The proportions of the skull are especially inconsistent, sometimes appearing absurdly oversized, other times strangely undersized. Worse still, it takes nearly 3/4 of an hour before Ghost Rider actually shows up, leaving the rest of the runtime to scramble through the main plot. Until then, we're stuck bouncing between Johnny Blaze's emotional baggage and scenes involving generic hellish villains doing ominous things. Much of the dialogue during this stretch is downright cringeworthy, made even more irritating by overprocessed vocal effects. While the movie clearly aims for fun, large chunks of Mark Steven Johnson's script, and even certain character portrayals, lean too hard into camp, sacrificing coherence and quality for cheap spectacle. The film often prioritizes hollow attempts at looking cool over meaningful storytelling, mimicking comic book imagery without capturing its substance. Those moments wear out their welcome quickly. In truth, a lot of what's here might have worked better if left on the page, or perhaps reimagined as a fully animated feature, ideally in traditional 2D. The cast, for the most part, rises to meet the film's extravagant demands, but this is undeniably Nicolas Cage's show. At times, he brings surprising sincerity and commitment. At others, he dives headfirst into full Cage eccentricity, prompting unintentional laughter. And then there are moments, especially toward the end, where his performance feels oddly drained. Yet despite all of this, the core concept remains excellent. The story itself is rich with potential, dark, grotesque, and ripe for supernatural horror. Scattered throughout the runtime are genuinely inspired ideas, both visually and narratively, and you can't help but wish they'd been executed with more care and restraint. While the over-reliance on digital effects hurts the film, some of the designs are still impressive. Even better are the practical elements, sets, costumes, stunts, makeup, and physical effects, which are consistently strong and often the movie's true highlights. While certain scenes flirt with excess and awkward presentation, I found myself broadly appreciating the cast. From top to bottom, it's clear the performers are fully invested, even when the material wobbles. The direction is competent if occasionally indulgent, sometimes leaning too hard into stylistic quirks that don't always land. The soundtrack's reliance on well-known songs can feel a bit heavy-handed, though the original score, energetic to a fault, does at least reinforce the film's heightened mood and identity. Taken as a whole, Ghost Rider is competently assembled, though that may not be the most important point. Despite its flirtations with horror imagery and tragic backstory, the film's dominant energy is playful and buoyant. It recalls the lighter, more mischievous spirit of early superhero adaptations, movies that weren't ashamed to embrace silliness alongside spectacle. There are genuine laughs scattered throughout, and it's obvious that everyone involved was aiming to entertain above all else. Every creative choice, successful or not, seems bent toward delivering a good time. Calling it a great film would be a stretch, regardless of one's generosity. Its strengths and weaknesses sit in near-perfect balance, making it just as easy to dwell on what doesn't work as on what does. Still, in honoring its fun-first philosophy, the film ends up tipping slightly into the positive. Enjoyment here depends heavily on how willing you are to let your inner child take the wheel. Personally, I found it more worthwhile than expected after years of dismissing it outright, though I can't imagine feeling compelled to revisit it. It's best approached casually, watch it once, absorb the manic energy, and move on. Keep expectations grounded, and you'll likely get the most out of it. On the surface, this is yet another Marvel adaptation that feels more intriguing in concept than in execution. The appeal lies largely in its iconography: devils, flaming skulls, roaring motorcycles, symbols that carry enormous cultural weight even before a story is attached. These images alone can shape identities and subcultures, so potent is their accumulated meaning. In a strange way, the symbol becomes the story, and that's both the film's hook and its limitation. There's an interesting cultural loop at play here. Motorcycle mythology itself was largely forged by cinema, later feeding into real-world subcultures, only to be recycled back into pop entertainment. Over time, those visuals migrated from film to tattoos, fashion, and eventually corporate branding. Ghost Rider feels like the final echo of that cycle, symbols returning home, stripped of deeper narrative purpose. It's a reminder of a long-standing risk in comic adaptations, prioritizing icons over storytelling. When imagery leads and narrative follows, the result can feel like motion without direction, flashy but circular. The film faced skepticism long before release, delayed and burdened by expectations tied to its director's previous work and its unconventional leading man. Nicolas Cage, whose career had entered an uneven phase, was widely seen as an odd fit. Yet that assumption ignores the passion he brings to the role. Johnny Blaze's origin, a stunt writer who trades his soul for his father's life, sets the stage for a deliberately outrageous premise. When supernatural chaos erupts, Blaze is transformed into a flaming avenger, bound by a devil's bargain and tasked with stopping a greater evil. For all its flaws, Ghost Rider is undeniably fun. Its comic sensibility and playful absurdity shouldn't be dismissed. Blaze himself is delightfully strange, eschewing alcohol for candy, enjoying soft pop music, and finding joy in the bizarre, even as he performs death-defying motorcycle stunts. As the Ghost Rider, he becomes an over-the-top force of fire, vengeance, and sharp one-liners, an oddly cheerful servant of hell who punishes the wicked with theatrical flair. This is the lens through which the film works best. Taken seriously, it collapses under its own symbolism. Taken as a cheeky, slightly unhinged comic book romp, it finds its footing. Cage's enthusiasm is unmistakable. His affection for the source material fuels a performance that's committed, fearless, and oddly endearing. Whatever its shortcomings, the film benefits immensely from that sincerity, and in the end, that may be its greatest strength. Nicolas Cage fully leans into the exaggerated, comic book absurdity of Johnny Blaze, embracing both the showy bravado and reckless abandon of the Ghost Rider persona. His performance is unapologetically over the top, but that's precisely what makes it work. In fact, Cage is almost single-handedly carrying the film, as very few others emerge with any real credit. Eva Mendes, cast as Blaze's love interest Roxanne Simpson, is given very little to work with. While she has screen presence, the character feels thinly sketched, and her role becomes more irritating than memorable as the film progresses. Peter Fonda's take on Mephistopheles lacks menace or gravitas, coming across as oddly toothless for a literal embodiment of the devil. Still, when compared to Wes Bentley's Blackheart, Fonda almost seems award-worthy by default. Bentley struggles to convey any real sense of danger or charisma, leaving his villain feeling hollow and uninspired. His accompanying henchmen fare no better, and their forgettable presence only reinforces how underwhelming the antagonists are. This is especially disappointing, because it's clear that Cage and director Mark Steven Johnson genuinely care about the source material and are trying to bring it to life with sincerity. At its core, Ghost Rider is an entertaining spectacle and looks especially polished in high-definition formats. Yet by the final act, frustration with the casting choices, particularly among the villains, may leave viewers wishing they could give the casting director a stern talking to. Entering the film midway through, it immediately gives off the unmistakable feel of a comic book adaptation, something later confirmed in the end credits. Unfortunately, it's also one of the least engaging heroic outings in Cage's filmography. The story follows a familiar and well-worn concept. A desperate man trades his soul to the devil in exchange for something he cannot obtain on his own. In this case, Johnny Blaze makes the deal to save his dying father from cancer. While the idea itself is timeless, it has been executed far more effectively in other films. To compensate, the filmmakers rely heavily on visual effects, often at the expense of narrative depth. One can't help but wonder how such a sizable budget resulted in a film that struggles to justify its nearly 2-hour runtime with a coherent or compelling story. This is a movie that will likely appeal most to viewers who prioritize visual spectacle above all else. Johnny Blaze is frequently engulfed in flames, wrapped in heavy makeup and digital effects, while Eva Mendes' character exists largely on the sidelines with little narrative purpose. Matt Long delivers a respectable performance as the younger Blaze, though the physical and emotional resemblance to Cage is minimal. Veteran actors like Sam Elliott and Peter Fonda are present, but their characters feel underutilized and ultimately unnecessary due to the weak screenplay. When a big-budget film's most entertaining moment belongs to a minor, one-scene character, it's rarely a good sign. Rebel Wilson appears briefly as an unconventional goth woman rescued by Ghost Rider, later describing him during a news interview with playful hand gestures mimicking the flaming skull. This scene is clever, unexpected, and genuinely funny, qualities largely absent from the rest of the film. Sadly, Mark Steven Johnson, who previously worked on Daredevil, fails to deliver anything equally inventive or spontaneous here. Even without deep familiarity with the original Marvel comics, it's clear that the cinematic version falls short of its potential. The film suffers from stale writing, uninspired villains, and action sequences that feel more obligatory than exciting. It lacks the scale, emotional weight, and narrative cohesion seen in stronger comic book adaptations like Superman, Batman, Blade, X-Men, or The Punisher. While the cast is undeniably impressive and the digital effects are often striking, neither can fully compensate for a bland and predictable script. Unless you're a devoted Ghost Rider fan, patience may be your best option. Waiting for a home release could save both time and money. The film unfolds chronologically, beginning with Johnny Blaze at 17, portrayed by Matt Long. He learns that his thrill-seeking father, Barton Blaze, has terminal cancer and little hope of survival. Enter Mephistopheles, an impeccably dressed stranger who offers to cure Barton in exchange for Johnny's soul. Johnny accepts, and while his father is miraculously declared cancer-free, fate intervenes when Barton dies in a fiery motorcycle accident soon after. Grief-stricken and bound by his bargain, Johnny abandons Roxanne and dedicates himself to becoming a legendary stunt rider, unknowingly sealing his transformation into something far darker. Nicolas Cage steps into the role of an older, surprisingly relaxed Johnny Blaze, a man who seems determined to test the laws of physics as often as possible. As a globetrotting stunt rider, he repeatedly pushes his long-suffering manager Mac to the edge with jaw-dropping feats that border on outright absurdity. One particularly outrageous moment sees Johnny soaring effortlessly over multiple military helicopters inside a packed football stadium and walking away without so much as a scratch. Realism is clearly not on the menu here, and anyone expecting grounded logic from Ghost Rider may want to adjust their expectations accordingly. At its core, the film is a Faustian-style morality tale about a reckless biker who becomes a supernatural enforcer once night falls, transforming into a flaming, skull-faced agent of the devil. Unfortunately, the version of Satan presented here is surprisingly tame, arguably one of the least intimidating depictions of the character in recent cinema. Traditionally portrayed as a master manipulator and supreme villain, this incarnation seems oddly passive, relying on Ghost Rider to handle problems caused by his rebellious son, Blackheart. Blackheart, pale and corpse-like in appearance, seeks to overthrow his father and seize ultimate power, but never quite manages to feel genuinely dangerous. As the plot unfolds, things become increasingly cluttered. The script introduces a mysterious cemetery caretaker who conveniently explains major story elements, including the revelation that he himself was once a Ghost Rider, albeit one who rode a horse instead of a motorcycle. This character acts more like a walking exposition device than a fully realized figure, which is a shame given the potential depth he could have added. Ghost Rider's signature ability, the penance stare, forces wrongdoers to relive the pain they've inflicted on others. It's an intriguing concept, but it proves largely ineffective against Blackheart, leading to a series of repetitive confrontations. Alongside Blackheart are three elemental henchmen, Earth, Wind, and Fire, who look visually striking but feel underused. Dispatching them takes far longer than necessary, stretching scenes that might have benefited from tighter pacing. Cage clearly doesn't take the material too seriously, and that's part of the film's odd charm. He plays Johnny Blaze with a self-aware sense of humor, sporting an intentionally questionable hairstyle, snacking on candy from a martini glass, and unwinding to soft pop tunes instead of hard rock. This tongue-in-cheek performance keeps the film from collapsing under its own silliness and helps maintain a sense of fun all the way to an ending that deliberately leaves room for a sequel. Supporting performances are a mixed bag. The actor portraying the devil delivers a restrained, almost lifeless performance, though at least it carries a certain cold elegance. Roxanne, now a confident television reporter reminiscent of a classic comic book love interest, follows Johnny's exploits from afar until she inevitably becomes the villain's leverage. Her kidnapping leads to the final showdown in a dusty, Western-style ghost town, where the old Ghost Rider briefly returns, hands over a weapon, and promptly exits the story, making his involvement feel disappointingly brief. The villains never truly challenge the hero, and Ghost Rider handles their defeat with ease. Visually, however, the film shines in places. Scenes of the flaming motorcycle defying gravity and racing straight up skyscrapers, or the blazing chain lashing through the air toward helicopters, are undeniably impressive. While these moments look spectacular, they don't add much weight to the story itself. Despite the ominous design of its central character, Ghost Rider ultimately leans more toward eccentric spectacle than genuine darkness. The film begins with a younger Johnny Blaze discovering his father is dying from cancer. Desperate, he accepts a deal from a mysterious stranger who promises a cure in exchange for his soul. Though his father is healed, fate intervenes cruelly, leaving Johnny alone and emotionally shattered. Years later, he has become a famous stunt rider, unknowingly bound to a supernatural destiny that soon catches up with him. Written and directed by Mark Steven Johnson, who previously delivered a lukewarm superhero outing, this film is a noticeable improvement in terms of entertainment value. Available in both theatrical and extended cuts, the longer version adds additional character moments that help flesh out the story, particularly Johnny's family history and the legacy of the Ghost Riders. While Ghost Rider is far from exceptional, it offers enough style, action, and memorable visuals to make it an enjoyable watch. The first full transformation takes its time, but once it arrives, it delivers one of the film's highlights. Watching Ghost Rider blaze down highways on a motorcycle engulfed in flames, leaving burning tracks behind him, is undeniably cool. The movie may be flawed, uneven, and occasionally ridiculous, but it still manages to be fun in its own strange, fiery way. The story itself is serviceable, clearly borrowing elements from classic Ghost Rider lore, and longtime fans will probably appreciate how it tries to respect continuity. The characters are decent enough, and the whole demons escaping hell to overrun Earth angle is familiar territory, but it works as a functional excuse to let Ghost Rider tear around the screen looking undeniably cool. I'll be honest, I enjoyed Ghost Rider far more as a flashy visual experience than as a tightly written or emotionally deep film. And sometimes, that's perfectly fine. This isn't the kind of movie you overthink. It's the kind you watch with your brain switched halfway off, enjoying the spectacle for what it is. While many might disagree, I found it just as entertaining as a lot of the big-budget comic adaptations released around the same era. It may not reach the heights of the best in the genre, but it holds its own in terms of sheer fun. Visually, Ghost Rider himself is the highlight. The flaming skull design is striking, and nearly every scene involving him on the motorcycle delivers some memorable imagery. From riding across water, perching atop bridges, scaling skyscrapers, and even taking down enemies mid-stunt, the film leans hard into comic book insanity, and that's where it works best. The CGI is mostly solid. Some transformation effects look a little dated, and making a human with a burning skull look believable was always going to be a challenge, but overall the visuals hold up reasonably well. With a reported budget hovering around $110 million, the film certainly looks expensive. Shot primarily in Australia with additional work done in Canada, it has that polished, glossy Hollywood finish you'd expect. The performances are mixed. Nicolas Cage is Nicolas Cage, sometimes entertaining, sometimes distracting. Eva Mendes looks great but isn't given much to do beyond that. Veteran actors like Peter Fonda and Sam Elliott provide welcome support, with Elliott in particular adding a bit of gravitas and charm. What surprised me most is that I ended up liking the film more than I remembered from its theatrical run. No, it isn't profound, and it's not trying to redefine the superhero genre, but for a movie about a leather-clad antihero with a flaming skull, it's about as enjoyable as it realistically could be. There's enough story to keep things moving, enough action to stay engaged, and plenty of striking visuals to make it far less painful than expected. The plot follows young Johnny Blaze selling his soul to save his father, then jumping ahead to his life as a legendary motorcycle stunt rider. When the devil returns to collect his debt, Johnny is forced to stop Blackheart from acquiring a contract of 1,000 souls, a deal that would unleash hell on Earth. In return, Johnny is promised freedom from his curse. With that, Ghost Rider is unleashed. The movie starts slowly, but once Ghost Rider finally appears, it kicks into a higher gear. This is where the film truly feels like a comic book brought directly to life, no extra depth added, no realism layered on. It doesn't aim for the philosophical tone of Spider-Man or the grounded seriousness of Batman Begins. Instead, it embraces the loud, exaggerated energy of four-color comic panels. It's ridiculous, illogical, and proudly cheesy, but also kind of fun. Is it a classic? Absolutely not. Is it a mindless popcorn movie? Without question. If you meet it on its own terms, there's enjoyment to be found, especially once the title character fully enters the picture. Seeing those old comic moments realized on a big screen has its own charm. And honestly, having Sam Elliott along for the ride doesn't hurt either. That said, it's an awkward middle ground entry. It's not good enough to impress adults looking for substance, and it's not exciting enough to fully satisfy younger audiences either, though kids around 11-14 will probably remember a handful of cool scenes. Overall, it doesn't come close to the quality of the best Batman or Spider-Man films. As for Cage, his performance is one of the film's biggest weaknesses. His portrayal of Johnny Blaze is overcooked, and his styling is so distracting that it's almost a relief when his face bursts into flames. Cage seems torn between wanting to be taken seriously and wanting to act like a cartoon, and that clash, combined with a weak script and uneven direction, results in a messy performance. And the Elvis mannerisms, they don't help. Eva Mendes, unfortunately, fares no better, stuck in a thankless role that offers little opportunity to shine. The supporting cast does what it can, but there's only so much they can do. In the end, Ghost Rider sits squarely in the middle of comic book adaptations. It's not great, not terrible, just a noisy, flashy, occasionally entertaining ride. Worth a look if you know exactly what you're getting into, but maybe not worth full theater price. Wes Bentley, best known for American Beauty, fits surprisingly well as the devil's offspring, while Peter Fonda's portrayal of Satan feels more like a presence than a performance. He mostly lurks in the background, tapping his cane and flashing those ominous glowing eyes. Sam Elliott, on the other hand, adds real gravitas as the mysterious caretaker whose quiet authority connects him to the deeper mythos of the story. The film is directed by Mark Steven Johnson, yes, the same filmmaker behind Daredevil, which alone sets expectations for how uneven things might get. At best, this movie scrapes a middle-of-the-road score, largely because it might entertain a very specific audience. Younger viewers who think flaming skulls and burning motorcycles are the coolest thing imaginable. If you want to push your endurance further, stay through the end credits for what might be one of the most painful covers of Ghost Riders in the Sky ever recorded, courtesy of Spiderbait. It's no Johnny Cash or Vaughn Monroe, that's for sure. The story itself follows Johnny Blaze, a carnival stunt rider in the vein of Evil Knievel, who performs death-defying motorcycle acts alongside his father. When his father is diagnosed with cancer, Johnny is tricked into making a reckless bargain with the devil, an impulsive decision that curses him to become the Ghost Rider, a flaming skeletal agent of supernatural vengeance. Johnson's Ghost Rider, 2007, blends classic Faustian legend with modern superhero tropes, borrowing heavily from Spider-Man while pulling elements from decades of Ghost Rider comic lore, including nods to the Western-era incarnation. Still, the strongest influence is clearly the 1970s-80s comics centered on Johnny Blaze. So what's the appeal? It's simple, really. A guy in black leather riding a Harley is cool, but a flaming skeleton in black leather riding a Hellfire-powered Harley, that's the entire pitch right there. Some fans criticized Nicolas Cage for being older than the character is traditionally depicted, since Blaze is meant to be around 30, while Cage was in his early 40s at the time. Sure, someone like James Franco, who closely resembles artist Mike Ploog's comic version of Blaze, might have been a more visually faithful choice, but Cage holds his own. He's physically convincing, and honestly, plenty of guys in their mid-20s look more worn out than he does. Eva Mendes, playing Johnny's love interest Roxanne, is noticeably younger, but brings enough charm and presence to make the role work. Tonally, the film sits awkwardly between extremes. Some viewers think it takes itself too seriously, while others feel it leans too far into silliness. In truth, it follows the same tonal balance as most superhero films released after 2000. A generally serious narrative, inherently unbelievable subject matter, and occasional humor sprinkled in. It's not grimdark, nor is it full camp. It rides right down the middle. If all you're looking for is a supernatural superhero movie with flashy visuals and a dark fantasy vibe, Ghost Rider delivers. But it also offers more beneath the surface. One of the film's strongest ideas is the moral weight of Johnny's decision to sell his soul. While most people will never literally bargain with Satan, the metaphor is relatable. Every time we choose selfishness, destruction, or cruelty over compassion and integrity, aren't we symbolically surrendering something of ourselves? Whether you interpret the devil as a literal being or a symbol of humanity's darker impulses, the struggle remains the same. Peter Fonda's Satan is both entertaining and oddly fitting, while Sam Elliott's character grounds the story with a moral compass. Love plays a central role throughout the film. Johnny makes his terrible bargain not out of greed or ambition, but out of love for his father, an act of self-sacrifice that places him in opposition to the devil's goals, as Elliott's character subtly points out. We also see genuine affection between Johnny and Roxanne, as well as the loyalty Mac shows toward Johnny. These moments stand in sharp contrast to the devil's realm, which is entirely devoid of love. Satan despises his son, and that hatred defines their relationship. It's a logical depiction. If God represents love, then separation from God naturally results in hatred and corruption. When Johnny first transforms into the Ghost Rider and unleashes his Hellfire-powered motorcycle, the destruction he causes is massive and uncontrolled. Interestingly, this chaos is noticeably reduced in later appearances. The implication is that Johnny initially lacks control over the spirit of vengeance and its supernatural fire, something he gradually learns to manage. Even small character details add texture. For instance, Johnny relaxing to the carpenters might seem like a joke, but it actually makes sense. A man living on the edge, burdened by a curse and a daredevil lifestyle, would naturally seek calm wherever he can find it. Listening to Karen's calm, almost hypnotic voice feels oddly comforting, like it could put anyone at ease. Visually, the film does have a few standout moments, especially the sequence where Ghost Rider charges off the top of a skyscraper, chains spinning wildly, before plunging straight down the side of the building and crashing into the street below. The reactions of the stunned police and bystanders sell the moment nicely. In the comics, Blackheart was one of the few characters who genuinely unsettled me, particularly in Ann Nocenti's Daredevil run. That same chilling presence never quite materializes here. Wes Bentley hints at it, but the performance never fully reaches that disturbing level. Still, he handles the role competently, and Blackheart's cruelty and menace do surface in brief flashes throughout the film. One of the more atmospheric highlights is a nighttime desert journey featuring Ghost Rider and the Caretaker, riding endlessly toward San Vengaza. The scene is paired with a heavy rock version of Ghost Riders in the Sky, which fits the mood perfectly and adds a lot of style. The Ghost Rider himself, whether you think of him as a he or an it, is largely a technical achievement. From a purely visual standpoint, the movie is often enjoyable to watch. The runtime sits at around 1 hour and 50 minutes, with an extended cut adding roughly 13 more. Filmed mainly in Melbourne and surrounding parts of Victoria, the production at least looks polished on the surface. I haven't really explored the comics behind the character, but the movie did make me curious enough to consider checking them out. As for the direction, I've generally liked Mark's previous work. His take on Daredevil improved significantly in the director's cut, fixing many of the theatrical version's problems. That said, it's hard to understand why he was handed another comic book adaptation, especially since this one arguably turns out weaker. In many respects, it feels like a step backward. To give credit where it's due, Nicolas Cage isn't terrible in the lead role, and Eva Mendes does fine as well, though the chemistry between them is shaky. The younger versions of the characters are serviceable. The humor lands often enough, the pacing stays steady, and the film never becomes outright boring. The soundtrack is consistently cool and well-chosen, and the penance stare is executed effectively. Unfortunately, that's where the positives mostly end. From that point on, the movie starts to unravel fast. Several performances feel flat, even from actors who have proven themselves elsewhere. The dialogue leans heavily on cliches, and the writing is riddled with plot holes. While any fantasy film can establish its own rules, it still needs to follow them, and this one frequently doesn't. The CGI ranges from acceptable to unimpressive. Some visuals look fine, but very little is memorable overall. Despite being an origin story, the film could have used more action, and the action that is included varies wildly in quality. The villains show some promise, but are dispatched in bland, anticlimactic ways. The limits of the characters' powers are unclear, and character motivations, especially the heroes, often feel confusing and underdeveloped. The film also draws uncomfortable comparisons to Spawn, which doesn't do it any favors. Content-wise, it stays fairly tame. Minimal language, mild violence, light horror elements, and no real sexual content beyond surface-level attractiveness. The PG-13 rating feels appropriate. I'd recommend this mainly to dedicated comic book movie fans, Ghost Rider loyalists, or motorcycle enthusiasts who might enjoy the aesthetic. For everyone else, it's a mixed experience at best. Overall, I'd give it a 6 out of 10. Going in, my expectations were already low, but even then, I didn't expect it to be quite as bad as critics claimed. Unfortunately, they weren't exaggerating. The story is confusing from the start, with poorly introduced characters and unclear relationships. At one point, I even mistook Blackheart for a younger version of Johnny Blaze, assuming the scenes were flashbacks. It wasn't until both characters appeared together that the confusion cleared, though the story itself never improved. Even once things become understandable, the narrative remains dull and unengaging. It lacks a truly compelling villain, meaningful supporting characters, and emotional weight. Several characters are introduced with potential, only to vanish without explanation. Meanwhile, the film checks off nearly every superhero movie cliché without adding anything fresh or interesting. In the end, it feels shallow and undercooked, offering nothing new to the genre and falling short in both style and execution compared to better comic book adaptations. The special effects aren't outright awful, but they're overused to the point of exhaustion, and the Ghost Rider's CGI design often looks artificial rather than intimidating. The film never quite lives up to what you'd expect from a mid-2000s superhero release. It's not that I have anything against Nicolas Cage as an actor, but he feels oddly miscast here. His performance doesn't really fit the role, and the romantic subplot between his character and Eva Mendes never convinces, largely because there's very little spark between them. The movie also brings in seasoned actors like Peter Fonda and Sam Elliott, though most of the supporting cast fails to leave much of an impression. Even with a steady pace and frequent bursts of action, the movie somehow still feels underwhelming. There's no truly memorable showdown, just a string of small action moments that tease excitement without ever fully delivering it. You're constantly waiting for one standout fight that never arrives. With a sharper script and a more confident directorial vision, the character itself clearly had franchise potential. At the time, it was hard not to hope that a sequel might correct these missteps and deliver a more engaging, entertaining experience. To be fair, the film does hold together in a very loose sense, but it repeatedly makes baffling creative decisions. It clings tightly to the early 2000s superhero formula, making it feel older than it actually is. It also seems overly impressed with itself, which might come naturally for a movie about a flaming-skulled biker, but it doesn't help. Scene by scene, much of the story feels directionless, and the excessive use of flashbacks only adds to the confusion. Visually, the movie is surprisingly weak. Aside from staying mostly in focus, the cinematography doesn't offer much to praise. The editing is aggressive to the point of distraction, and the visual effects often look cheap and dated, resembling novelty horror filters rather than cinematic spectacle. The performances lean heavily into overacting, but not in a fun or self-aware way. Cage's sporadic accent choices make his dialogue difficult to follow at times, and several actors appear disengaged, as if simply showing up to collect a paycheck. The action sequences are sluggish and awkward instead of thrilling. The title character himself often comes across as unintentionally silly, muttering about punishment and justice while lurching from one encounter to the next. The movie exists in an uncomfortable middle ground. It tries very hard to look cool, yet doesn't try hard enough to be genuinely entertaining. It's not infuriating, but it's also not enjoyable, and it fails to reach that so bad it's good category. Instead, it's just bad. As a result, it's difficult to recommend, even to fans of ironic cinema. Overall, it's a disengaging experience that barely holds attention. Final verdict, 3/10. That said, something unexpected happens about halfway through. After an opening stretch full of clumsy exposition, the film begins to lean into its own absurdity, and suddenly, it becomes oddly enjoyable. This isn't a well-crafted movie by any traditional standard, but it seems vaguely aware of that fact. Rather than chasing prestige, it embraces its ridiculous premise and barrels forward without shame. This is, after all, a movie about a supernatural biker with a flaming skull. Cage delivers the same unfiltered performance he brings to most of his roles, but here it oddly works in the film's favor. It's hard to tell whether he's playing things straight or knowingly hamming it up, and that uncertainty adds to the charm. Eva Mendes doesn't get much to do narratively, but she makes the most of her screen presence. Peter Fonda's take on the villain is subdued to the point of forgettability, while Sam Elliott stands out as the gravel-voiced caretaker who feels lifted straight from a classic Western. His desert race sequence, set to a familiar country tune, is easily one of the movie's highlights. This is the kind of film that practically demands you switch off your critical thinking, grab a drink, and let the chaos wash over you. Watched on its own terms, it can be a surprisingly fun ride.